This is Mike Williams with World War II with Mike W., the history of the 95 Years' War. Just a quick reminder, be sure to click on that thumbs up button to show YouTube you like the video. Click on the subscribe button to subscribe to this channel, and also click on the notification bell. This is so YouTube will let you know when the next video is posted. Please share this with a friend by clicking on the share icon, either above or below this video, and tell your friends. Also, leave your comments below. There is also a link below so you can get one of these great t-shirts. A perfect way to support the channel. This all helps me and the channel. In this video, I will cover the major events that take place in 1936 in the countries of Great Britain, Italy, Japan, and China. The fate of these last two countries at this time are closely tied. Again, there are so many things to talk about and so many things that happen that I could easily get lost in the details and go down a bunch of rabbit holes. So please forgive me if it seems I have left something out. Timestamps for each country will be in the comments section below. Great Britain, 1936. If you remember from my video on the Royal Connection, I talked about the death of King George V on January 20th, 1936. When he died, Prince Edward, Prince of Wales, became King Edward VIII. He was king for 325 days, but had to cancel his coronation and chose to abdicate the throne on December 11th, 1936, due to his love for Wallis Simpson. She was twice divorced, so she would not be suitable to be queen. As a result, Prince Albert, Edward's younger brother, is crowned King George VI the next year in 1937. So it is clear, King Edward VIII was king. He just never was coronated, the official ceremony crowning the monarch. A couple of key things that play a role in the coming conflict we know as World War II happened here in 1936. There was the first test flight of a single-seat, mono-wing, all-metal fighter airplane on March 5th. It was the Supermarine Spitfire, deemed to be one of the most beautiful fighter aircraft ever designed. During its development, there was a flaw in the fuel supply system that caused the engine to stop and then possibly flood, making it unable to start again during a maneuver that was common in dogfighting. That's when two fighter planes from different sides of a fight are trying to shoot each other down. Not good. The problem was solved by a brilliant woman engineer, Beatrice Schilling, who designed a fuel pump that kept the fuel flowing regardless of how the plane was positioned in the air. On August 26, 1936, the Anglo-Egyptian Treaty was signed, which required the withdrawal of British troops and recognized Egypt as a sovereign state. Britain was allowed to leave 10,000 troops and 400 pilots in Egypt to ensure the security of the Suez Canal, which was a critical lifeline and the line of communication with the British Empire. Those troops will come in handy in a few years. On October 4th, there was a street fight in East End of London between fascists and anti-fascists. The British Union of Fascists, led by Oswald applied for a permit to march and receive permission. They had previously been engaged in intimidation of the Jewish community there in the East End. There's no denying whether or not the Jews were specifically targeted by fascists here either. This march was met by a counter-march held by members of all the other communities. They even had the slogan, "Mosley shall not pass," very reminiscent of "No pasaran" in Madrid here in 1936 during the Spanish Civil War. The march was eventually called off by the fascists, but only after the riot resulted in over 150 arrests and over 175 injuries. Support for Hitler and Mussolini was not as strong as Mosley had expected, I guess. Even with the lack of support for the Nazis that seemed evident in a London march, there was a diplomatic policy in Great Britain that was well established by 1936. That, my friends, is appeasement. A future prime minister is best known for his actions of appeasing Adolf Hitler, but it didn't start with Neville Chamberlain. Stanley Baldwin was prime minister in 1936, when Hitler and Germany remilitarized the Rhineland. Nothing was done in response diplomatically. Mr. Baldwin did increase military spending and started the rearmament process during his tenure, though. Finally, on November 12th, a brilliant man, Alan Turing, submitted a paper called On Computable Numbers to the London Mathematical Society. This man was a brilliant mathematician that would play an unfathomable role in the coming war. This paper introduced the concept of the Turing machine, a machine that uses ones and zeros to compute. Maybe you're familiar with this computer idea. Now, Italy in 1936. Things are not all rosy and sunshine in Italy in 1936. The Italian army had completed their takeover of Abyssinia, now known as Ethiopia. The League of Nations instituted economic sanctions on Italy because of the invasion. This created a need for Italy to turn inward for supplying its own economy. As a side note, Mussolini installed former King of Italy Victor Emmanuel III as Emperor of Abyssinia. Both the invasion there and the coming military involvement in the Spanish Civil War created more of a strain on the economy in 1936. The occupation of Abyssinia alone was a vast drain on resources. This resulted in an underlying resentment for the Fascist Party. Fascists did have a firm control on power, the economy, and society as a whole. Even with all his failings, Mussolini remains in control. Things are a little worse off in Japan here in 1936. First, there was the February 26th incident. This was far more than a mere incident. It was a full-blown attempt at a military coup in Japan. About 1,400 members of the military were involved. Most of these soldiers were new recruits. Back in 1936, military training for new recruits was no walk in the park. It was extremely humiliating and physically abusive. These young men were easily persuaded after such training to obey and go along with what they were told. These members of the military were looking to remove civilian control of Japan's military, establish the emperor as the ultimate leader, and distance Japan from capitalism. They had grievances about the London Naval Treaty that I mentioned in my episode about 1930, as well as proposed cuts to the military budget. On the morning of February 26th, 120 soldiers entered the home of Finance Minister Korikyo Takahashi and killed him in his bed. Two other prominent moderate members of the government and military were assassinated. Former Prime Minister Mikado Sato and General Hataro Watanabe. Both of them supported good relations with the United States and Great Britain. They did not succeed in killing Prime Minister Keisuke Okada, even though they did occupy the government buildings in Tokyo, Japan's capital. Emperor Hirohito did not support the insurrection at all, even though they claimed they were looking to establish him as undisputed leader. He had the rebellion crushed by the army, and all the ringleaders were arrested. They were tried in closed trials and convicted. 19 of the conspirators were executed and 40 more were imprisoned. Result of the coup politically was surprisingly not to increase civilian power or control over the military, but quite the opposite happened. Pro-military control sentiment began to take hold. Disregard to the naval weapons limitation began and military spending began to increase dramatically. As I mentioned in my episode about Germany in 1936, Japan had signed the Anti-Comintern Pact with Germany. This was an agreement to exchange information and collaborate in preventing communist activities. As far as the economy goes here in Japan, there was full employment. Japan had fully recovered from the Great Depression by 1936. Military spending did help things along economically. Now finally, China, 1936. Civil war is raging in China. Two sides are the nationalists under the leadership of Chiang Kai-shek and the communists under the leadership of Mao Zedong. By mid-1936, the communist forces were nearly defeated. They had fought their way to the northern province of Shaanxi. This is where the remnants of the communist forces had gathered. Being nearly defeated, they changed their strategy from class warfare to an anti-Japanese sentiment. Don't worry, these communists will go back to their class warfare when it benefits them later. Chiang Kai-shek wanted to continue the campaign against the communist forces and end it now. Many of the officers from the army in the northern area, especially those from Manchuria that was occupied by Japan, refused to fight the communist forces because they also wanted to fight Japan. They even went so far as to detain Chiang when he flew to the region to get the nationalist forces moving against the communists. This detainment became known as the Siam Incident. The country was very upset at his detainment, and even the Soviet Union demanded his release. They actually held him captive until he agreed to no longer pursue defeating the communists and work toward a united front against the forces of Japan. He was released on December 25th. Thank you so much for watching. The next episode will cover 1937. The world is sliding into the abyss of World War II. The next couple of years set the stage for the perfect storm. I'll see you next time on World War II with Mike W., the history of the 95 Years' War.